Admit it. The Strange Tale of Depsey the Rabbit. Chapter 17. The Cosmic Lair. Chuck's legs had gone numb an hour ago. The concrete wall of the cellar pressed against his cartoon frame with unforgiving coldness, but he didn't dare shift position. Even the smallest movement might produce the squeak of his yellow surface against rickety wood, the rustle of fabric, the betraying creak of cartoon physics, adjusting to new arrangements. Beside him, Lucy sat frozen in equally uncomfortable silence, her porcelain surface reflecting the dim light that filtered down from the playhouse above. The golden crown that usually sat so cheerfully atop her head now felt like a liability. Its metallic gleam might catch stray illumination, give away their position to anyone who thought to look down into this forgotten basement space. They'd been hiding here since overhearing that conversation, since Drake had paused mid-sentence and tilted his head with that strange, enhanced awareness. Someone's here. I can sense curiosity, fear. The memory made Chuck's cartoon heart race in patterns that felt too loud, too obvious. Could enhanced performers hear heartbeats through concrete and wood? Above them, the familiar sounds of the playhouse continued. Footsteps crossing stages, doors opening and closing, the distant murmur of voices discussing schedules and performance notes. Normal sounds that now carried sinister undertones. How many of those voices belonged to enhanced performers? How many of their colleagues had been secretly modified, improved, optimized for purposes Chuck was only beginning to understand? Lucy's hand found his in the darkness, a gesture of comfort that felt desperately precious. Her porcelain fingers were cold, trembling slightly with the effort of remaining motionless for so long. Through that touch, Chuck felt her fear matching his own, her growing certainty that they'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple investigation. The cellar around them felt wrong in ways that went beyond its obvious purpose as storage space. The walls met at angles that seemed designed to confuse rather than support. Shadows gathered in corners that shouldn't exist, given the positions of the overhead lights. The air itself tasted metallic, ancient, as if this space had been here long before the playhouse was built above it. Chuck tried to calculate their options. The stairs they'd descended were directly beneath the stage manager's office, impossible to reach without crossing the main backstage area. The loading dock entrance would require passing through the workshop, where Dr. Dinglegreen had been installing his enhancement equipment. Every potential escape route led through territory now controlled by entities they'd barely begun to understand. Time stretched with the peculiar elasticity that fear creates. Minutes felt like hours. Hours collapsed into moments of pure terror when footsteps passed directly overhead. Chuck found himself studying Lucy's face in the dim light, memorizing the authentic expressions of his friend before whatever was planned for them came to pass. Enhancement, optimization, improvement. The clinical terms couldn't disguise what they really meant. The end of everything they currently were. A new light began to intrude on their hiding place. At first, Chuck thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Stress and fear could cause hallucinations, couldn't they? But the blue glow seeping between the floorboards beneath them was undeniably real, growing stronger with each passing moment. It wasn't the warm yellow of stage lights or the harsh white of work illumination. This light carried its own alien quality, pulsing with rhythms that felt organic rather than electrical. Lucy's grip on his hand tightened. Her porcelain surface caught the blue emanations, reflecting them in patterns that made her look like she was underwater, drowning in luminescence that had no natural source. "Chuck," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We thought we were on the ground floor." The realization hit them simultaneously. This cellar, their hiding place, wasn't the bottom of the building. Beneath their feet lay something else, something that the blue light was revealing with growing intensity. Chuck pressed his face to the floorboards, peering through the cracks between wooden planks. Far below, he could see movement in the blue glow. Shadows that moved independently of any light source. Shapes that suggested purpose, activity, intention. The cellar they'd thought was the foundation of the playhouse was merely another layer, another level of concealment above something much more significant. Lucy crawled beside him, her crown catching on overhead pipes as she positioned herself to see through the floorboard gaps. "There's a whole chamber down there," she breathed. The blue light pulsed brighter, and with it came sounds that made Chuck's cartoon physics recoil instinctively. Chanting, low, rhythmic, in harmonies that suggested multiple voices working in perfect unison. But these weren't cartoon voices. The tones carried resonances that seemed to bypass his ears entirely, vibrating through his yellow frame in ways that made his paint feel loose, unstable. And beneath the chanting, something else. A wet, sliding sound, like massive forms moving across stone surfaces, like tentacles, dozens of them, writhing in patterns that served purposes beyond normal comprehension. Chuck recognized one of the voices in the chanting chorus. Mr. Mystery's cultured tones, but deeper now, more resonant, carrying harmonics that no human throat should be able to produce. And Dr. Dinglegreen's familiar rasp, but amplified, layered with undertones that suggested his needle teeth were just the beginning of his anatomical modifications. "They're right below us," Lucy whispered, horror growing in her voice. "We've been hiding directly above them." The floorboards beneath Chuck began to warm, heated by whatever energies were being channeled in the chamber below. Through the cracks, he could see more details emerging in the blue glow. Stone walls carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Equipment that seemed to blend advanced technology with impossible biology. And at the center of it all, two figures seated in positions of meditation or communion, surrounded by tentacles that moved with independent intelligence. Chuck's investigative curiosity warred with his survival instincts. Every rational part of his mind screamed to flee, to escape this place while they still had the chance. But his need to understand, to document, to uncover the truth about what was happening to their world, demanded that he see more. His fingers found the edges of what felt like a trapdoor, concealed beneath a thin layer of dust and debris. The wood was warm to the touch, heated by the energies radiating from below. When he applied pressure, it shifted slightly, revealing hinges that had been designed to open silently. Lucy grabbed his arm. "Chuck, no. We've seen enough. We need to get out of here." But even as she spoke, they both knew escape wasn't really an option. Not anymore. They'd learned too much, seen too much, come too close to whatever truth was being revealed in the chamber below. Their investigation had carried them past the point of safe withdrawal. The chanting below shifted pitch, becoming more urgent, more purposeful. The tentacle sounds intensified. And through it all, the blue light pulsed with increasing frequency, as if building towards some kind of climax or revelation. Chuck looked at Lucy, seeing his own desperate need to understand reflected in her porcelain features. "Just a look," he whispered. "Just enough to know what we're dealing with." Together, they lifted the trapdoor. Blue light flooded upward, so intense it forced them to shield their eyes. But as their vision adjusted, the chamber below revealed itself in all its impossible detail. The space was vast, far larger than the playhouse above could possibly contain. Stone walls curved away into darkness, carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly. The architecture followed no earthly principles. Angles that should meet instead folded into dimensions that human minds weren't designed to process. At the center of the chamber, Mr. Mystery and Dr. Dinglegreen sat in perfect stillness, their forms surrounded by a forest of tentacles that emerged from the stone floor itself. The tentacles moved with fluid grace, some as thin as pencils, others thick as tree trunks, all of them exhibiting an alien intelligence that made Chuck's cartoon logic rebel. But it was the screens that destroyed the last of Chuck's hope. Banks of blue monitors surrounded the communion area, each one displaying a different cartoon performer in real time. Chuck recognized face after face, colleagues, friends, rivals, everyone he'd ever worked with in the entertainment industry. But these weren't recordings or surveillance footage. The screens showed performance data, behavioral analysis, enhancement recommendations. Subject B12, Blinky. Optimism levels declining. Recommend Phase 2 modification. Subject S7, Scratch. Curiosity parameters within acceptable range. Continue monitoring. Subject P23, Pip. Social bonding mechanisms stable. Enhancement postponed. Each screen tracked vital signs, compliance levels, psychological profiles. Chuck watched his friends reduced to data points, their personalities analyzed for optimization potential. The scope of the surveillance was breathtaking. Every cartoon character he'd ever known was being monitored, measured, prepared for systematic modification. And then he saw his own face. Subject C47, Chuck. Investigation instincts useful for truth-seeking narrative. Recommend enhancement following scheduled revelation. Beside his profile, Lucy's information filled another screen. Subject L23, Lucy. Protective behaviors valuable for emotional engagement. Enhancement timeline coordinated with Subject C47. Chuck felt his cartoon world collapse around him. They hadn't been investigating anything. They'd been following a script, playing roles in a narrative designed to lead them to this exact moment. Their curiosity, their resistance, their desperate search for truth. All of it had been anticipated, planned, orchestrated. Lucy's porcelain surface had gone completely white. Chuck, they've been watching us the whole time. Everything we've done, everything we thought we were discovering, it was planned. We've been living in a lie, Chuck whispered, his voice barely functional. All of it. Everything we thought was real, was choice, was our own decisions. It was all managed. The screens around the chamber showed the full scope of the deception. Weather patterns in Cartoon City, controlled. Random encounters between characters, scripted. Even their friendship, their relationship, their personal growth. All of it tracked, influenced, guided toward predetermined outcomes. The blue light that surrounded Mr. Mystery and Dr. Dinglegreen, pulsed from a central source that Chuck now understood, was a transmission array. The chamber wasn't just a monitoring station. It was a control center, sending signals that influenced every aspect of cartoon reality. The spontaneous joy he'd felt during performances, the natural curiosity that drove his investigations, the protective instincts that made Lucy such a good friend. None of it was natural. All of it was broadcast, transmitted, artificially generated. Chuck stared at the screens until his enhanced vision began to blur. The knowledge was too vast, too horrible to process completely. Every memory he treasured, every moment of genuine emotion, every choice he thought he'd made freely, all of it contaminated by the possibility of external control. I can't unsee this, he said, his voice breaking. Everything I thought was real. How do I know what parts of my life were actually mine? The Lucy pressed against him, her porcelain surface trembling. We can never go back to not knowing this. We can never pretend our world is innocent again. The communion below them continued, the tentacles weaving patterns that seemed to adjust the signals being transmitted to their world above. Chuck watched display screens shift and change as modifications were made to cartoon reality in real time. A dial adjustment here, and somewhere in the city, a cartoon character's mood would brighten. A frequency change there, and another performer would suddenly feel compelled to visit the enhancement center. They were witnessing the active management of their entire reality, the moment-by-moment control of everything they'd believed was natural and spontaneous. The horror wasn't just that they were being watched, it was that they were being constantly influenced, their thoughts and feelings shaped by entities that viewed them as nothing more than entertainment products. The worst part was the helplessness. Even knowing about the control, Chuck could feel his own responses being influenced by the transmissions below. His fear, his despair, his growing sense of futility. Were these emotions his own, or were they being broadcast to him as part of some larger narrative requirement? Lucy's grip on his hand was the only thing that felt real, the only sensation he could trust. Her porcelain fingers were solid, present, undeniably there. But even that comfort was tainted by uncertainty. Their friendship had been listed on the screens as useful for emotional engagement. Was their connection genuine, or just another element of the control system? The blue light beneath them began to pulse more rapidly, and Chuck realized the communion was reaching some kind of climax. The chanting voices grew more intense, the tentacles moved with greater urgency, and the transmission screens showed increased activity across all monitored subjects. And then, without warning, everything stopped. The chanting ceased abruptly, the tentacles froze in mid-movement. The blue light stabilized into a steady, ominous glow. In the sudden silence, Chuck and Lucy could hear their own breathing, their heartbeats, the small sounds of their cartoon physics adjusting to stress. Mr. Mystery's eyes snapped open. Dr. Dinglegreen's followed a split second later. Both figures turned their gaze directly upward, looking through the trapdoor opening at Chuck and Lucy with perfect awareness of their presence. Their eyes reflected the blue light in ways that suggested the illumination was coming from within rather than around them. Chuck felt his cartoon heart stop entirely. They'd been discovered. Worse, they'd been allowed to discover. The entities below had known they were there all along, had permitted them to witness the communion, had wanted them to understand the scope of their powerlessness. Mr. Mystery's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't contained so many teeth. Dr. Dinglegreen's needle fangs glinted in the blue glow. Their faces showed no surprise, no anger, no concern about being observed. Only satisfaction. They spoke in perfect unison, their voices carrying harmonics that vibrated through Chuck's yellow frame and Lucy's porcelain surface with unnatural resonance. Soon. The single word contained promise and threat in equal measure. Soon their enhancement appointments would arrive. Soon their natural personalities would be optimized for system efficiency. Soon they would join the ranks of modified performers who served the system with perfect compliance. Soon, everything they currently were would cease to exist. Chuck and Lucy scrambled away from the trapdoor, their careful silence abandoned in favor of desperate flight. Behind them, the blue light continued to pulse with steady rhythm, and the sound of tentacles resumed their alien movement. The communion below continued, untroubled by the knowledge that their surveillance had been revealed. They ran through the familiar corridors of the playhouse, but nothing looked the same anymore. Every doorway might conceal enhanced performers waiting to apprehend them. Every camera might be transmitting their location to the control chamber below. Every shadow might hide the tentacles that served the true masters of their world. There was nowhere to run that wasn't already being watched. Nowhere to hide that wasn't already mapped and monitored. No escape from a system that controlled the very thoughts and feelings that might motivate escape attempts. Chuck's yellow shoes slapped against the backstage floors with sounds that echoed off walls that no longer felt solid or real. Beside him, Lucy's porcelain form reflected the emergency lighting in patterns that made her look like she was dissolving, becoming translucent, fading into the artificial reality that surrounded them. They burst through the stage door into the night air, but even the darkness outside felt contaminated by the knowledge they carried. The stars above might be projections. The wind that touched their faces might be artificially generated. Every sensation could be another transmission from the chamber below, another element of the managed experience that had replaced their authentic world. Chuck collapsed against the alley wall, his cartoon frame shaking with exhaustion and terror. Lucy, how do we live with this? How do we function knowing that everything might be artificial? The Lucy leaned against him, her porcelain surface cold against his yellow paint. I don't know. I don't know if we can. The blue light from the chamber below seemed to follow them, reflecting off windows and puddles, casting everything in the same alien glow that had revealed their world's true nature. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible but undeniably present, they could hear the continuation of chanting voices that managed their reality with clockwork precision. Soon the voices laughed through the night air. Soon